Well, good morning, PowerOx fans. We are here today to talk about track width adjustment. When you first receive a PowerOx, it will come in a crate set at the most narrow track width. Sometimes you may want to change that, and there's a page in the manual, so please have your manual. We'll be needing pages 15, 16, which talk about the track width adjustment, and then when we're complete, going back together again, page 23, 24 talks about the chain tension adjustment. And then also on page 27 in the specifications talks about the different track widths and the measurements. And why would you want to change? Well, if you are set up on 15-inch rows, you may want to straddle one row, and so that would, the narrowest setting would set your wheels approximately between the rows. So you would be able to straddle just one row. You also might want to use the most narrow setting if you were working between two 30-inch rows, and that would allow you to have the most inner, the wheels set the most narrow. If you went to the wide setting, for example, you would be able to straddle two 12-inch rows. So you could straddle two rows and still work outside of that, but that would center up your wheels to where they need to be. And then if you went to the mid-range, you could straddle two 10-inch rows, and that would approximately put the middle of the tires between the rows. So that's the reason for allowing for that adjustment. Right now, this morning, we're going to talk about how we adjust this machine. It happens to be set at the mid-range right now. So we'll put it out to the wide and also discuss a little bit about the narrow. Before we get started, just wanted to show the types of tools we would use. I've got a needle nose pliers, a 1/8 Allen wrench, and if you have one of these snap ring tools, this one's a .047, talks about the tip of those so that it will go into the hole in the snap ring, and it's set so that I can squeeze, which would open up the C snap ring. Screwdriver just in case, 9/16 wrench and a deep well socket, 1/2-inch wrench socket, and my impact tool and a short extension. That's all you need. Also, the jack stands. The jack stands are really important, or something that will allow you to lift slightly the PowerOx so that your wheels rotate freely, but nothing is unstable. So you want to be able to find a location where the unit is stable and you can turn the wheels, and we'll talk about why that's important later. But I found a couple of spots underneath the frame that I think are useful, because your jack stands, they just need to be in a location that don't hinder the movement of these wheel housings once the unit's stabilized. So I'm going to put this one underneath this side and raise it slightly so that it's underneath the frame, the red frame of the PowerOx, sort of in the middle. And I'll raise this up. Okay, you can see how that lifted my kickstand. You also want to make sure that your kickstand is down. with the pin in it so that that doesn't move. And we have a hitch on the rear, and I'm just going to put that just to the right of the center of the back hitch. This is good location in the back. And I'll need to lift slightly, so I'm going to use my leg. See if I can get under here. There we go. Now we have the power aux. It's on the jack stands. We're off the ground a couple inches. Things feel fairly stable. We want to make sure this doesn't fall. Both wheels rotate. So now we're going to go to page 15 of your operator's manual. It talks about track width adjustment. So the wheels can be adjusted to the 3 different locations, narrow, mid, wide, in 4-inch increments to accommodate those different settings. So it'll be 2 inches per side as that moves outward. Wheel spacing dimensions are located in the specification section of this manual like we talked about. Ensure that the Power Aux 240B is securely supported. Failure to properly support the unit could result in damage to equipment or injury. So just want to protect our power aux and our toes and fingers. Support the unit with jack stands to ensure that the wheels are off the ground. We've done that. Now remove the left and right axle covers by removing the 8 5/16 mounting bolts. So we're going to grab our impact, our little extension, and the 1/2-inch socket to remove those 5/16 bolts. We'll also take the 5/16 wrench. On the back side, these have what we call the extruded nuts, so you don't need the wrench. Just turn them out slowly. Those 4 bolts, and that will be free. And we'll pull them off both sides. And I'll point out that these are locking flange nuts. So they have resistance all the way when they're coming off and going on. And you don't need a washer because they have a flange. Okay, we're also going to remove the shield from the belt. Take a look at this. We'll use our 1/2-inch socket, and there are actually only 3 bolts that you need to remove. These 3 here are not removed. They attach this front part of the shield, so we got 1, 2, 3 bolts to remove. Once again, uses the extruded nuts. And it all comes off. And we do this so that we have access to the bolts that hold these wheel housings on. So right now, as I mentioned, we're in this mid-range. We'll move the whole thing. So next part of the procedure, we're going to take off this adjuster right here. And let me get a 1/2-inch wrench to go on the back side. And we'll use this same socket here. Now this has a 9/16 nut on it. And I'm just going to loosen from the bottom. I want to keep that adjustment approximately the same. So to remove this, we're just going to loosen this bottom nut. And keep those together. And got the same on the other side. Now we need to remove the chains on both sides of the unit. I like to use needle nose pliers. People have different ways to do it, but in order to remove the chain, you have to find the master link, and we rotated it. There it is. I kind of located this one previously, so with this I can hit the end of it just right. There we go. Remove that outer clip, and you got the side plate come out. Those pieces, make sure you don't lose them, and you can slide the link out, and the chain will come off. So we want to do that for both sides. There we go. Off the outer plate. And we're free. Okay. Now that we've removed the chains, we need to loosen the bearing and the sprockets with loosen their set screws. So we're going to grab that 1/8 Allen wrench, and you'll see the set screws on both the bearing and the sprocket here. And there are 2 set screws on each one. So we do that, we turn it a little bit, get both of them. And there, that one you can see rotates. Okay, now we move to the right side, do the same thing. Find our Allen screws. And take care not to turn them all the way out. That avoids them getting lost, which is easily done, especially if you're working in a barn and they fall through the cracks in the floor. Okay, now we're going to move to our 9/16 socket, and we need to remove these fender mounting bolts here. These are held on with carriage bolts. So carriage bolt, once again, it's got a square pattern on the underside so that it fits into a square hole, and you don't need another wrench on it. You just use one. Might put your feet under it to just support it a little bit. You're still held on by this, by your bearings, so you just want to get those bolts out so that you can move the whole thing when it's time. So usually the last one is the one that's hard to get out because everything is shifted by then and got all the weight on it, but there you go. Now that we have this wheel suspended and we need to remove it, there may be some imbalance here. Since I had about 2 inches of space under both wheels, I'm just going to insert this 2x4 underneath this side over here just to make sure we don't get off balance too much. Now I'm going to give it a pull and see how it responds. Maybe do a little lifting with my feet, and there we go. Okay, we're free. And while we're at it, we're going to finish this left side. Next step in our instructions, adjust the snap ring, sprocket, and Woodruff key. So this is actually what we call a C-clip, but we use these snap ring pliers. We're going to get on here, put them in the little holes. And that spreads open, hopefully far enough that you can move it. See there along the shaft, we're going to go to the outer position. Put that outer one in there. We want to make sure that snap ring is seated well in its groove. there are a series of grooves along the shaft, and there's a C-clip on both sides of our sprocket. So we move our sprocket over, and then we can move the Woodruff key first, because that's what has to keep that sprocket from turning. So on this shaft, you'll see there are these half-moon indentations, and a Woodruff key is in a half-moon shape. And that's where either our needle nose or our screwdriver comes into play. These things they're seated in there pretty tightly. So sometimes you have to try to get underneath, maybe give it a little tap. Okay, so what I just encountered here was a little difficulty getting out this Woodruff key. Normally, a new machine, it should slip out. It may require a little tapping, as I showed, but this unit has been out in the field, it's been used a while, and so this is good, teachable moment for me as service manager and for anybody listening, that if this key is difficult to come out, I got a chisel which has a sharpened point, and was able to get under one corner and pry, tap and pry, tap and pry, and that way you don't want to hit with full force on a unit where this could be damaged. You just want to tap lightly and pry upward with the upward motion to pull out the Woodruff key. But in this case, the Woodruff key now is slightly damaged. I'm going to just put in a new one. Sometimes with a file you can clear off the burrs, but we just want it to go back in smoothly. So this is a little 3/16 by 1/4 inch half-moon Woodruff key. And so we're moving now to the outer slot. And so I'm just going to use this file just to make sure no burrs on the edge and it's clear. And that way we can also put in a little bit of grease, or in this case, this is not a lubricant, but it's WD-40. It just helps slide a little bit. And we can get that into the slot. And if you do need to tap on this to get it in, it's okay. Just do it with something supporting the shaft so that you can get this slide in. Just lightly. And we can also, our sprocket will help us as we get it onto the shaft. So we also need to move this C-clip to the to the second position. There we go. Sprocket, teeth inward. And we match it up with our groove. And we need to tap a little more. Yeah. Okay, now it went into the hole, so I'm going to use this board and tap. And we'll make sure that it seats against that C-clip. There we go. So we've got the inner C-clip, and we've got our Woodruff key in position. It went into to the groove on the sprocket, so that will keep it from rotating. And now we need our outer C-clip. Okay, make sure that's seated. So now we're gonna reinstall the wheel housing and the wheel. If you can get comfortable in a position where you could get your feet under it, that's probably will help. But our objective is to slide it onto the bearing, the shaft onto the bearing, and get to the right location. Go on. There we go. So you just want to find your location. So these two outer holes are not used for this position. It's the next hole set that's inside there. We grab our carriage bolts and come up from the bottom. I got one bolt up through the bottom, and we're going to put this 2x4 underneath to give us a little bit more lift. There we go. Now we can get situated a little easier. I think we can get this back one in here. Kind of got to hold your tongue right to get that up through there. Now we'll try for this front inside one. This middle one's a little bit of a challenge. It's close to the rib, the top of the rib of the tire. Yeah, that was better. For this one, this bolt in this position, it's right in the middle of the rib of the tires, so I'm going to use my needle nose pliers to reach that up inside there, find a hole. There we go. Okay. And once it's into the square of the wheel housing, hold it, and there we go. We're good to go. Lock these into position now. Get our 9/16. Hold the nut, or rather the bolt head up so that the square goes into the hole of the square hole of the wheel housing. Just do it lightly first, get them all in position. Now that we have the wheel housing in position, we can secure the set screws on the bearing and the sprocket. So we've got our 1/8 Allen. We'll lock this down. And normally a good twist, hand tight, is sufficient to lock those into place. And now while we're here, let's put on the chain. Now we're going to take away our 2x4 again so we get a little bit of a wheel rotation. I think the easiest way for this will come in from the top, and you can get it to lay on the wheel a little bit. It'll pull it around for us. There we go. And lay one end up here on the shaft. While we try to fish this other one up and lay both ends then over the sprocket so that they're together like that. And get our master link, put it into the holes, hold it together. And we've got our two pieces, the outer plate and when you put on the clip of a chain, you should always put the open end following. So our normal tire rotation is in this, the chain is rotating in this direction. So we want the closed end of the clip forward. So we'll put that, and I like to just put it on, slide it over, and then with my needle nose pliers again, I can grab the end and just put the clip on. Some folks like to do it with a screwdriver. Sometimes I feel like it bends the clip a little more, but this works for me. So there we have the left side taken care of. And now we'll move to the right. And I added a little grease into the hole just in case you ever have the intention to move this once again. It'll make removing this key easier. So we're gonna just get it into the hole and give it a slight tap. And if we can, the leading edge that goes where the sprocket goes into, if we can get that just a little bit, yeah, there, where it seats into that groove, then we can use the actual sprocket to tap that in the rest of the way. We don't want to tap hard. There we go. And we just want to seat it against our C-clip. And we bring the inner C-clip into position. There we go. Okay. And this time, you'll notice I didn't even remove the housing completely. The housing was still right at the edge of the shaft. And so now we can just slide it and find the right holes. So actually that has to move outward. There we go. Just remove the block just so that we can be now seated on the ground. We can get our bolts up in there easier. Now we have the wheels on, the chains on. We need to reinstall the chain tensioner. We'll try to keep that location the same. And this time it's since we moved it to the outer location, we move this chain tensioner into this location here. So you can add that. The larger 3/8 nut from the bottom. And we can tighten those up. So we'll need a 1/2 inch. Need that 9/16 inch. We can make adjustment to this based on the instructions that are in our manual. So we'll just refer to those. Chain tension adjustment. Okay, lift the rear of the power rock so the tires are off the ground. We can do that. We've got this free. Remove we've taken off the covers, all that. Slightly loosen the flange bearing mounting bolts. All of the 3 flange bearings. So we have to slightly loosen the bolts on each one of these, 1, 2, and 3. And so that take our 1/2 inch wrench, we'll just slightly loosen it. This one's a little bit more of a challenge. It's inside underneath this shield. Now, when it talks about chain tension, it's a little bit like the Goldilocks phenomena. You don't want it too tight or too loose. So too loose would mean that it would be almost falling off or falling off. And too tight, you hear a lot of ratchety, noises coming from it that aren't good. So when the chain is tightened properly, you just need a little bit of deflection. And so if you sight from the top sprocket to the bottom sprocket and just about in the middle, press your finger, and if around 1/4 inch is sufficient, and you can make adjustment if you need to by adjusting these nuts. So we're going to tighten this one just a little bit. That takes our 9/16 wrench, not our 1/2. And so you need to make sure that your nut underneath allows you to move. Yeah, that's quite a bit better. Okay, so once that's set, you can retighten the bottom nut. And then with the 1/2 inch bolt, or 1/2 inch wrench rather, you can tighten up these nuts again. We're going to wait on this side here till we adjust the other side, then we'll tighten down for the center. And many times when you feel like a chain might be just on the edge of being loose, when you actually tighten down the nuts on the bearings, it actually takes out a lot of slack. So Always give yourself a little bit of leeway when you do this. So we'll put on the bottom nut, 9/16 wrench, tighten this. Take our 1/2-inch wrenches, tighten the nuts on the bearings. They're still good. Now that I have the rear of the machine elevated, I just want to spin, make sure my shafts are in parallel, and then I can tighten that center bearing down. You shouldn't really have to worry much about that one, but just if you did happen to see irregular movement, like a rise and fall of the shaft in the center, you can correct that by moving that center bearing. Now the back one. Okay. Now we put the shields back on. You should really not operate your unit without the shields, especially with chains exposed. They're actually very dangerous. A child gets a finger in a sprocket with a chain on it, and it can be devastating. We call these extruded nuts, and they're like clips, and so they don't require a nut or you to hold your hand on the other side, but they are somewhat fragile, so just be careful when you're rethreading that you get back in, threaded correctly before you try to tighten it down. And I would tighten these back down with your hand tool rather than the impact. You can use the impact where you have a wrench and a nut, a regular nut on the bottom side. And once again, these locking flange nuts do require force to install completely. So don't be surprised if you have to just zap it a couple times just to make sure that it's all the slack is taken out, just not too much. Okay, that includes our video about the setting of the wheel width. And so if you have any questions about how to do things yet, please feel free to give us a call here at Tilmor. There are also instructions in your manual for more details, but yeah, I hope this was useful, and if you need anything else, please give us a call. Thanks.